This is the Know Your Law series by Barefoot Law, a non-profit organization which uses digital innovation and technology to provide free legal information and guidance for all. For more information, visit www.barefootlaw.org.
Welcome to this webinar. Thank you, Rhoda, thank you, Rebecca and Sandra, for being part of this session. So yeah, we're just going to discuss and understand how succession works here in Uganda. In 1906, that was when the first legislation for succession was actually drafted. So from 1906, I think up until 2018, that is when efforts to kind of make reforms and amendments to the Succession Acts to be more inclusive, to ensure that it was more equal, especially as pertaining to women's rights, was realized. So from 2018 up until recently, April 30th of 2021 of this year, that was when the Parliament passed the Succession Amendment Act 2021. Yes, so we're just going to understand how succession operates here. We're going to discuss a bit of the reforms and the provisions that were changed, that were removed, as well as create more conversation on how to make it even more inclusive than it already is. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just gonna start by introducing myself. I am Daphne Nkunda. I support the communications team here at Barefoot Law. Barefoot Law informs, it educates and provides legal guidance to individuals and to groups through two ways. It's twofold. We use traditional means such as partnering with community-based organizations, having grassroots grassroots community outreaches, and also using innovative ways to basically equip and inform individuals on their rights, with the hope that they are able to maneuver and to navigate the legal system from an informed point of view in the process of accessing justice. So I'm going to ask these lovely ladies to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Rebecca, then Rhoda, and then Sandra.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Pleasure to be a part of this panel today and to be a part of this discussion. I'm a lawyer in court. Currently, I do a lot of work around land management, land governance, and I'm really doing a lot of research around those areas, and a bit of advocacy and also capacity building. Yeah, that's basically the briefest way I can put my bio out there.
Hi everyone, my name is Rhoda Namboze. I am currently in charge of Barefoot Law's development team. So what this means is I oversee our fundraising efforts, our resource mobilization efforts, as well as the range of supporters that we have in place that support our work, whether it be financially or strategically. And so I wanted to introduce Barefoot Law, but I think Daphne, you've done a very, very good job. And so all I will say is I'm very privileged to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to the discussions that we shall be having. Thank you.
So good morning once again. My name is Sandra Acheng, and I work for Women of Uganda Network as the networking. So a little bit about WUGNET. WUGNET, Women of Uganda Network, we empower women through the use of ICT. WUGNET, Women of Uganda Network. So WUGNET is an NGO that promotes and supports the use of ICT among women and women's rights organizations in Uganda, so that they can take advantages of the opportunities presented by ICT and the internet to address national and sustainable national and local problems among sustainable development. So at Women of Uganda Network, we operate under 3 program areas, that is information sharing and networking, gender and ICT policy advocacy program, And then we also do a lot of technical support to our members, the beneficiaries in the communities, and also to the WUGNET staff. So our work specifically is around women's rights online, ensuring that the women, men, boys, and girls equally are able to use ICT, access ICT, to access opportunities, to share their views online, to demand for service delivery. So we do work around governance and accountability, ensuring that the community are able to embrace ICT, to demand for service delivery in the communities. And then also we do a lot of work around online gender-based violence. I know majority of you might be well versed with what gender-based violence is that happen online. But now with the uptake of technology, there's been a lot of violence that is shifting from the offline to the online world and vice versa. And then also we do a lot of work around agriculture and then entrepreneurship, ensuring also that the policies, the internet, ICT policies, and also gender policy are gender inclusive, includes the issues that women face in our communities. And then also we do a lot of work around trainings on digital rights, digital security, to ensure that as women and men access the internet, they are safely using it and they're using it meaningfully. So I would like to stop here, but for more information about our work, you can go to our website, www.wooknet.org, and then you can also go follow us on Twitter at Wooknet, and then also follow us on Facebook, Women of Uganda Network, and Instagram at Wooknet1, and also feel free to share your thoughts about today's discussion. I would like to stop here and hand over the mic to Daphne. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. That's a very expansive introduction. Okay, so we're just going to start with, I think, defining the key terms, defining the basic elements of succession. So I'm going to ask Rhoda to go through that as I share my screen as well. Yeah.
As a get-go, as we all know, our time on Earth is finite, and that obviously means that no human will or can live forever, at least not yet. And so one day we will eventually die. But before we do that, during our time on Earth, we amass property, we amass belongings and property, whether it be from shoes to clothes to phones to laptops, business shares, houses, land, all of these things we amass while we're here, but we will eventually leave them. And so the law of succession essentially seeks to ensure that in the event of their death, people are able to plan for a transfer of responsibility and ownership of their property, as well as a fair distribution of that property to their estates, in the hope that conflicts can be avoided. And so in the process of succession, it can take two forms. One is known as testate succession, which is a situation where there has been a will that has been left by the deceased, and usually they are able to spell out how they want their property to be distributed. And then there's also intestate succession, where there is no will that has been left, and so court generally has the ability to then appoint someone that will then oversee the distribution of the deceased property. And so let me maybe address some key terms that will definitely come up during our discussion today. Let me see from the screen. Okay, so in relation to, I know I've touched on testate and intestate succession. So in relation to a legal wife, I will actually go ahead and actually find this as a spouse. And this is something that will be discussed during today's discussion because it's part of the amendment. So a spouse is known as a husband or a wife who at the time of the deceased's death was validly married to, or in a valid marriage with the deceased, and a marriage that is lawfully recognized in Uganda. And in Uganda, there are actually three lawful kinds of marriage. So there's a civil marriage, there's customary marriage, and then there's religious marriage. And under religious marriages, the law recognizes or it provides for Christian marriages, Hindu marriages, Hindustan marriages, as well as Islamic marriages. So a spouse under the law is someone who is, at the time of the deceased's death, was in a valid marriage with the deceased. Let's see, we have, so in terms of comparative terms, they are children, again, versus dependent relatives. So under the law, children are any known offspring, any child of the deceased, and this usually includes those who are born in and out of wedlock. Out of wedlock is a key part of, I think, is going to come up during our discussion today, as well as adopted children, and these are adopted within the parameters of the laws in Uganda. Whereas dependent relatives are individuals that may have relied either completely or significantly or substantially on the deceased for the provision of their ordinary necessities suitable to their station in life. So this actually includes a spouse, it includes children under the age of 18, and those over, if they are over the age of 18, then they have to have significantly relied or substantially relied on the deceased at the time of death. It also includes parents, including step parents and adoptive parents. Step parents and adoptive parents, as well as siblings, grandchildren, grandparents, and nieces and nephews. This is also a provision under the amendment. And other terms that I think I can define are the difference between an executor and an administrator. So earlier I stated that there are two types of succession: testate and intestate succession, and there are certain people that are appointed to oversee this process. So an executor is usually the person that is named under a will to enforce or carry out the wishes of the deceased in accordance with the terms that are set out in the will. Whereas an administrator is now a person who is chosen or legally appointed by court to manage the property and oversee the distribution of a deceased who did not leave a will behind. And in that same thread, the process or what the court grants is different. So where there's a will that has been left behind, usually the court will grant what is known as letters of probate. And this is essentially, it's a court order that empowers an executor or a group of executors to enforce the wishes of the deceased as stated in the will. Whereas the letters of administration are a court order that empower an appointed person, in this case an administrator, to manage and distribute the property of the deceased who has passed on without leaving a will behind. So this is broadly the most common terms that you can. Yeah, so these are the most common terms that probably will come up quite often during the discussion. But if there are any other terms, maybe people can ask for definitions, and I think the panelists, we will go ahead and try and define them as we address them. So yeah, thank you, Daphne. I hope this substantially covered it.
All right, thank you, Rhoda, for that. I'm going to hand the mic over to Rebecca to just share with us a brief history, a brief backstory on how the team at Landnet were part of the process of the amendment of the Succession Act. Yeah, so just take it away.
Thank you so much, Daphne and Rhoda. I hope you can all hear me. So Landnet Uganda, I'll briefly introduce Landnet Uganda and what it does and how it eventually started to be an integral part of this process. So we're founded in 2012 as a network engaged mainly in research, capacity development and policy advocacy on land, gender, agriculture, and natural resource development. So part of what we do is bring a range of stakeholders together with the aim of having a significant effect on development outcomes from different land governance initiatives. So central to this kind of relationship is creating advocacy platforms to carry key messages and represent positions agreed to by both non-state and state actors. Then knowledge management and again sharing platforms that seek to basically generate new knowledge using participatory and inclusive approaches, and then have multi-stakeholder dialogues aimed at still building consensus and raising a collective voice on key and pertinent emerging issues on land governance. So where we came from was, first of all, I think it was Daphne that mentioned that this law was an archaic law that was initially enacted in 1906 and eventually amended. I think the first amendment of this law was in 1972 when we had the succession amendment decree. So definitely it was outdated and did not really speak to the contemporary issues of our country as a society. And since then, we had then made progressive steps towards elimination of various human rights violations, including discrimination and non-equality based on things like sex, race, religion, and these were still reflected within the Succession Act as is right now. Then we also realized through our work that there are mainly three legal categories through which people acquire land. They either buy the land or they are gifted the land. That would be a gift inter vivos in the lifetime of someone. You gift the land to someone else, or they inherit the land from a deceased relative, which is usually parents. So for the largest part, Ugandans get land through inheritance. It's passed down from one generation to the next to the next. And unfortunately, for most of women, they were sidelined at this point. They were unable to access land through inheritance, largely because of culture that is patriarchal in nature and believed that land should be passed on through the male lineage, but also because the succession laws were largely unenforced, but they also maintained discriminatory provisions that relegated women to just access and use rights instead of ownership and control over these resources. So that's when Landnet decided that in order to increase women's opportunities to own and control land, because if we're being very honest, it's mainly land that's the asset of value that's usually passed down during inheritance is land. So we had to make sure that it was rectified at that point to ensure that women then have a chance to control and own land, and also use the opportunity during this amendment process to sensitize communities about these various cultural practices that were discriminatory and sidelined women, and ensure that there was a mindset shift. So that's basically how Landnet came into the process. We started in 2017. Initially, the goal was to try and push for government to bring forward a government bill on succession, to amend the Succession Act. And where we came from was one, there was already a court case, Law Uganda versus the Attorney General in 2019, in 2007 that had declared certain pertinent parts of the Act unconstitutional. For example, the distribution schedule, section 27. So that alone had left an implementation gap for courts that did not have a schedule on how to distribute estates belonging to intestates. Sorry to confuse you a bit, but yeah, so we were coming from that point, but also the fact that Uganda Law Reform Commission had produced an extensive study that was published, I think, in 2014, that clearly stipulated the study was a lot deeper, and the research really reviewed all the provisions, literally all the provisions of the Succession Act, and proposed recommendations to its amendment. So we thought it was then easier for us to push for government to bring forward a government bill based on the work that had already been done previously. So unfortunately, we hit a number of snags. As you know, it's very hard to propel the government to do, especially with gender-related laws. It's so much harder to get them to work. Conducted a number of consultative meetings with different stakeholders within that particular sector. We had some with the Administrator General's Office, that's the chief implementer of this law, the judiciary, academia. We had a number with civil society organizations. And from those various consultations that we had, we managed to produce an issues and position paper on the Succession Act. Because through those meetings, that's how we were able to raise a number of issues that people were having and practical challenges that people were having in the use of this law. And that is what informed this issues and position paper. So it's at this point that we managed to get a consultant, a legislative drafter, to draft what constituted the Succession Amendment Bill of 2018. So this bill had an amalgamation of both the issues and position paper and then the research from Law Reform Commission. That's why when you look at the bill, it's quite extensive. It's over 50, I think 55 clauses or so, because it had recommendation from all over the place that were amalgamated and then reduced to what now is what was the Succession Amendment Bill 2018. So this bill was tabled with the support of WOPA and the Women Land Rights Movement. We tabled this bill with a member of Uganda Women Parliamentaries Association. Honorable Rosette Kajungu was the mover. So she tabled it in 2018 and November. I think that's why the bill, the first, you'll see a number of bills. There's the one of 2018, then subsequently in 2019, the government then woke up and presented a government bill called the Succession Amendment Bill 2019. So that was quite a dilemma for the technical team because now they had two bills on the same subject matter. So what they decided, because one took precedent, that was a private member's bill, so it would be, it would take precedent even in its presentation and consideration. But through a number of harmonization meetings, they agreed to consolidate the content between the content of the two bills to constitute one bill. So we had a number of meetings with officials from First Parliamentary Council, the Administrator General's Office as well as academics again to find a way to properly consolidate this bill into one. And it was also good because it helped to enrich the bill even further, because there are definitely aspects of the bill that government looked at that you probably did not foresee or consider looking at. Similarly, the government had issues within the private members bill that it had not considered. So consolidation was going to be the best option to get a better document at the end of the day. So yes, I think the whole of 2020 was really just a consolidation process. I think this bill would have been passed by Parliament for third reading much earlier on if it had not been for the COVID-19 situation. So that slowed down the whole process. But eventually, when it was consolidated, it was then presented to Parliament for second and third reading and passed by Parliament in March of this year, March or April of this year, 2021, and then now presented to the President for assent. I think Daphne will get to that point of assent and probably what his response was in regard to the bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for that insight. I think that gives us a lot to touch on and a lot to talk about.